how's it going? My name's Joe, and I recently picked up the DC Direct Batman the Killing Joke action figure 2-pack. This set includes Batman and Joker action figures based on the artwork from The Killing Joke by Bolland. And it also comes with a softcover copy of the Killing Joke comic book. Now, I've been eyeballing this set for a while at a local comic book shop. It was originally marked at $60, but this store has sales pretty frequently, so I got mine for $40. So that works out to about $20 per figure and a free comic. While I was waiting on the sale, I tried to find some video reviews on YouTube, and I just couldn't find any that were really good quality. The best one I found was only mostly in focus, and it was all in Spanish. Unfortunately, yo no habla español. So that's why I decided to do a review of my set. So let's get started. Here's the crime. But first of all, I really enjoy The Killing Joke, or else I wouldn't own multiple copies of it, and I wouldn't have picked up these figures. However, I do think it's a little overrated, and I find it somewhat frustrating. Batman acts really out of character as far as I'm concerned. At the beginning of the story, he shows up at Arkham Asylum to have a little one-on-one with the Joker, and he's like, look, we can't keep doing this thing where you bust out, wreak havoc, I haul you back in, because we're going to end up killing each other eventually. I think there are better, more true-to-form versions of Batman, like the animated series Batman, or the Dark Knight Batman, for instance, who would dismiss Joker as a madman. He can't be bargained with, he can't be reasoned with, he doesn't feel pity, or remorse, or fear, and he absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead. And there's a little Terminator reference for you, but I think it applies to the Joker too. He's the unstoppable force to Batman's immovable object. I don't think Batman should try to find common ground with the Joker, and the Joker doesn't have a better nature to appeal to. Second, throughout the story you see flashbacks to the Joker's origin as a failing, milquetoast comedian who falls in with a criminal element to get some extra cash to support his growing family. These gangsters dress him up as the Red Hood for a heist at a chemical plant. Batman shows up to stop them, and the Joker falls into a vat of acid that turns his hair green and bleaches his skin. This is a modernization of a 1951 story called The Man Behind the Red Hood. I personally don't care for the Joker having one definitive origin. I prefer to think of this as a potential origin for the Joker. Maybe the Joker is so crazy, and he's told so many different versions of the story that even he can't keep it straight anymore. For instance, in Mad Love, he just tells whatever story will earn him the most sympathy. Maybe in The Killing Joke, he's trying to manipulate the reader. I know that's kind of a stretch, but that's how I prefer to interpret this story. Now, I've always heard that Alan Moore never intended for The Killing Joke to be in continuity, but it became canon because it was so popular with fans. This story is pivotal for Barbara Gordon, the original Batgirl, because she's paralyzed from the waist down by a gunshot from the Joker in an attack designed to drive her father, Commissioner Gordon, insane. She remained paralyzed from this point in 1988 up until the New 52 reboot in 2011, where Barbara's spine magically healed and she was significantly de-aged. If you listen to the old Grant Morrison interview on Kevin Smith's Fat Man on Batman podcast, Morrison suggests The Killing Joke is the last Batman story, because in the end, Batman breaks his one rule and finally kills the Joker. And maybe that is what Alan Moore intended. The ending is a little vague. But since DC considers this story in continuity, and the Joker keeps reappearing in the comics, we know that he must have survived the events of The Killing Joke. However, you can look at this as an Elseworld story, where Joker dies at the end if you prefer. And even though The Killing Joke isn't one of my favorite Batman stories, it's incredibly thought-provoking, the artwork by Bolland is gorgeous, and it's an important landmark in Batman continuity and made a major impact on the comics industry. Obviously, Tim Burton's 1989 Batman movie draws a lot of inspiration from The Killing Joke, and I think a couple of the Phantasm's gangster victims from Batman Mask of the Phantasm were modeled after the gangsters from The Killing Joke. So we've been looking at this nice hardcover version that I have, just because it's easier for me to flip through for the camera, but I have several different copies of The Killing Joke. This is the version of the softcover that came with the Batman and Joker figures by DC Direct. And this is a 5th printing of The Killing Joke that I bought really cheap at a local comic book shop just to compare to the hardcover version here. This hardcover version is not exactly the same as the original. Obviously, it's been recolored. Here's an example where the recoloring was a little bit more drastic. This is the original artwork, and then here's the artwork that's been recolored for this hardcover version. And again, here's the original version, and here's the recolored version. And finally, here's the original colors, and there's the recolored version for the hardback. Another thing I find particularly curious is that DC is retconning out the yellow oval around Batman's bat symbol on his chest. We see in this panel he has the yellow oval around the bat symbol, and this panel, and then in the recolored, reprinted hardcover version, they've omitted the yellow oval around the bat symbol on his chest. And it's like that throughout the whole book. I don't really understand what the point of that is. I actually prefer the yellow oval around Batman's bat symbol because it makes more sense that instead of just being a logo, it's actually a target on his chest to draw gunfire away from his face. Re-editing comics isn't anything new for DC. I just found out recently that they made numerous changes to the collected editions of the Death of the Family story by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. I have the individual issues of the Death of the Family and never had the desire to pick up the trade or hardcover versions, so I can't compare them side by side like I have with the Killing Joke here. I think it's interesting to compare collected, or in this case re-edited editions to the original comics. There's also an animated movie based on the Killing Joke that actually saw a limited release in movie theaters before it went to home video. My wife and I went to go see it with some good friends of ours. There's a bunch of new stuff with Batgirl added to the beginning of the movie, mostly to pad out the runtime, but it also gives people who aren't familiar with the comics some context for who Barbara Gordon is and how devastating her attack and the resulting paralysis is to her and the Bat family. Unfortunately, this isn't very well done. Barbara is objectified, over-sexualized, and gets victimized even more so than she does in the original comic, and it feels like it's being done more for shock value than for anything else. The worst part is a bizarre sex scene between Batgirl and Batman, which seems really creepy to longtime fans like me, because Batman has always been depicted as being a mentor to Batgirl, and I'd say he's at least a good 15 years older than her. Maybe it was because I saw it on the big screen, but the animation seemed a little rough and unfinished to me. Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy's voice acting is fine, but it's not enough to save the movie from being a dumpster fire. I don't own a copy of the Killing Joke animated movie, and I couldn't recommend anyone watch it. The sculpted detail in this Joker figure is pretty spot on to the way that he looked in the Killing Joke comic. He has a non-removable wide brim hat. He comes with a camera that he used to take photos of Barbara, a small shot glass, and the revolver that he used to shoot Barbara with. Since this Joker doesn't have an individual trigger finger, there's a gap in the trigger guard on the pistol to give the illusion that he does. The paintwork on this figure is fairly well done. There's a paint wash on his face to bring out some of the sculpted detail, but since there's not a paint wash on any of the Joker's other exposed skin, it just makes his face look really dirty. I think it's kind of interesting they gave him pink or reddish colored eyes. Overall, I think the paint and sculpted detail in this figure makes him a good representation of Brian Bolland's artwork from the Killing Joke. Joker has a pretty nice neck joint with really nice range of motion. He can look all the way around like this and from side to side. My biggest gripe with the figure is that you pretty much have to pose him with his left arm raised up like this, or else it really throws off the sculpt on his swivel shoulder here. That just bugs the crap out of me. It's not as apparent on this arm, but it is still an issue. This Joker figure has swivel biceps and single jointed elbows. They're pretty stiff on mine. And he has swivel joints at the wrist. He doesn't have any articulation in the torso or the waist. He has swivel hips that go forward about this far, and they go back about this far. He has a mid-thigh swivel joint hidden very well by the legs of his shorts. He has single-jointed knees that provide about that much motion, and he has swivel joints at the top of his socks there. So overall, this Joker figure has better articulation than your typical DC Direct action figure. This Batman figure is fairly disappointing compared to the Joker. I think that the ears kind of stick out at an angle and look more like horns than they do like bat ears, and I don't think that's really representative of Brian Bolland's artwork. Also, I think the lines sculpted around his eyes and his face make him look much older than he is depicted in the Killing Joke. There's a little bit of paint slop right there on his right cheek. That's a little disappointing. I do like how the cape is sculpted over his shoulders, but I wish it didn't obscure the bat symbol on his chest so much. One of the coolest things about this figure is that if you hadn't taken him out of the package, you might not realize that he has the battle damage sculpted on his left arm from where the Joker squirts him with acid in the comic book. This figure comes with a batarang that he holds very tightly in his right hand. This figure has a pretty nice billowy cape that's cast in this real flexible, soft plastic. Unfortunately, he's kind of sculpted so that he's like perpetually looking down, and he's kind of pre-posed with one leg jutting out further than the other. He always looks kind of hunched over. You can't really pose him standing straight up. This Batman figure has a swivel joint at the neck. He has ball hinge shoulders that are really restricted by this cape. There's not a lot of range of motion there, unfortunately. He has single jointed elbows. And again, these are really stiff on mine. No articulation at the wrist, nothing in the torso. It seems like there would be a waist swivel joint there, right above his belt, but there's not. This figure has swivel hips that move about this far forward, and about this far back. He has single jointed knees, they move about that much. No articulation in the ankles. So this is basically your typical DC Direct plastic statue. This Batman figure has 9 points of articulation, whereas the Joker figure has 17. So overall, even though the articulation is kind of disappointing, he's a pretty decent looking Batman figure. I'm always happy to add a blue and gray Batman figure to my collection, especially when he has the yellow oval on his chest. These figures stand pretty well on their own, but they each have a peg hole in their right foot, and they both come with a Batman the Killing Joke action figure stand, with one peg. Unfortunately, any little nick or scuff or scratch becomes very apparent because it has a real flat finish on it. Here's the Killing Joke Joker with a few other Jokers I have in my collection. Here's the Batman Legacy Golden Age Joker. There's the DC Collectibles Animated Series style Joker or Timverse Joker. There's the DC UC kind of classic Joker. It's basically my go-to Joker action figure. There's the DC Multiverse Dark Knight Returns Joker. There's the DC Collectibles Icons Joker. And then there's the DC Collectibles Batman Little Gotham Dustin Wynn Joker. Here we have the NECA Toys R Us exclusive Dark Knight Heath Ledger Joker. There's the Arkham Asylum video game Joker. Arkham Knight video game Joker. This is the DC Collectibles New 52 Joker. This is actually how he appeared in the first issue of Detective Comics in the New 52 before he gets his face cut off by the doll maker. This is the DC Collectibles Death of the Family Joker, and this isn't actually a designer series figure, but he looks exactly like Greg Capullo's artwork from that storyline. And here's the Mattel DC Multiverse Endgame, or Hipster Joker as I like to call him. Full disclosure, I don't really play a lot of video games, and I've never played any of the Arkham games. It just seems like too much of an investment in money, and especially in time for me right now. So I guess you can call me a poser if you want, because I have bought a bunch of figures based on the Arkhamverse video game series, even though I've never played the games. I probably wouldn't have bought this figure, except I got him for $10 when the local comic book shop I was going to went out of business. Since I haven't played the game, I don't have any context for why Joker's wearing this getup, but I assume that the game does its own version of the Killing Joke story. He's wearing a trucker hat, a Hawaiian shirt and shorts. He's got a camera with a strap, flower lei, a real metal chain for his wallet, and a couple of interchangeable clenched fist hands. The pistol was borrowed from another figure. He's got great articulation for a DC Collectibles figure, but the Hawaiian shirt is one solid piece, so you can't move the joints in his shoulders or his torso, and he always kind of looks like he's shrugging. The sculpting and paintwork is really nice, and I love the bright white plastic they use for the Joker's exposed skin. This is probably as close as I'm ever going to get to doing a proper review of this figure, but I thought it would be cool to go into a little bit more detail, because he seems like a modern version of the Killing Joke Joker, and he could serve as a stand-in your collection if you're having trouble tracking down this comic book style Killing Joke Joker figure. Alright, here we have the DC Direct Killing Joke Batman figure with some other Batman figures that you may have in your collection. There's a pretty typical DC UC style Batman figure that came in the Gotham City 5-pack. There's the DC Collectibles Icons Afterbirth Batman. There's the Mattel Batman Unlimited New 52 Batman with a metallic gray costume. And finally is the DC Superheroes Batman figure by Mattel. That one came in a 2-pack with Batgirl. So even though the DC Direct Killing Joke Batman figure isn't part of the designer series per se, he is based on artwork by Brian Bolland, so I thought it would be fun to compare him to some designer series Batman figures. The designer series is basically figures modeled after the artwork of a specific illustrator. Here we have the Darwin Cook New Frontier Batman. Here's the Lee Bermejo Noel Batman. Here's the Greg Capullo New 52 Batman. And here's another Darwin Cook Batman figure. Up next is the Batman Animated Series Batman figure, or Bruce Timm style Batman figure. Here's the Tim Sale Batman, Matt Wagner Batman from Trinity. And just for fun, here's a custom repaint of the NECA 1989 Michael Keaton Batman figure in the classic blue and gray color scheme. Alright, just for shits and giggles, I thought it would be fun to compare this Killing Joke Joker figure to some Batgirl figures that I have in my collection. Here's a DC Direct Batgirl figure. I'm not exactly sure what series she came in. Next we have the Yvonne Craig Batgirl from the Adam West TV series by Mattel. Here's a blue and gray Batgirl from the DC Superheroes line by Mattel. Next we have a repaint of the DC Superheroes Batgirl figure. This one actually came out in the Batman Legacy line by Mattel. Here we have the DC Collectibles Batman the Animated Series Batgirl figure. And here's the Batman Unlimited New 52 Batgirl figure by Mattel. Finally we have the Joker with a custom comic book style Oracle figure that I just finished up. She's basically the Marvel Legends Mary Jane Watson figure that came in a Toys R Us exclusive 2-pack, with light blue acrylic dry brush on her jeans, custom glasses made of wire, and I touched up a few spots on her neck and shoulders. The wheelchair came with a Professor X figure from the first X-Men movie that I got really cheap at a local comic book shop. I repainted the chair and extended the footrest to accommodate the MJ figure. After being paralyzed by the Joker, Barbara Gordon continued to fight crime as Oracle. She was kind of like field support for Batman and the Birds of Prey. Maybe I just haven't read the right Batgirl stories, but I've always thought Barbara was infinitely more interesting as Oracle than she ever was as Batgirl. So there you have it. There's my review of the Killing Joke Batman and Joker action figures by DC Direct. Even with the poor shoulder articulation, I think the Joker is excellent, and I would definitely recommend it. The Batman figure isn't as cool as I was hoping, but he looks decent enough, I guess. This Joker was reissued with a new head sculpt, minus the wide brim hat, in the Secret Files line. There's a really cool story called Prey, where Hugo Strange becomes so obsessed with Batman that he makes his own Batsuit. So DC Direct reused this Batman figure for a Hugo Strange in Batsuit figure that was also released in the Secret Files line. I don't have either of those versions to show you, or else I would have. So I hope you found this video entertaining and informative. Maybe you'll be inspired to read the Killing Joke comic or track down these figures for your collection. So do you agree with me that the Killing Joke is fascinating but a little overrated? Or do you think that it's a masterpiece and I'm completely full of crap? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, let me know what you think of my custom Oracle figure. Well, that's all for me today, so until next time, take care, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.